Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Achieve More podcast. My name is Anthony. You can find me on YouTube at Picksburgh, where I have vlogs every week with my girlfriend where we go and do fun stuff and travel. But also, it is the video home of the Achieve More podcast. So if you'd like to come and see how strikingly handsome we are, that's where you get to come see right here on Picksburgh on YouTube. I do want to give a shout out to Michael over at Huddle Card Collection, who's my co-host. He's not with us today, but if you could go check out his channel, he does a podcast every Wednesday evening called Collecting Profit. If you're into sports cards and collectibles, it's a really fun one. Without further ado, today we have an awesome guest on with us. We have Zach Tidwell. He's a former Marine, and he's done some really awesome things in his life, and he's here to share a story with us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Zach. If you could go ahead, just introduce yourself and anything you'd like to share, feel free.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. My name is Zach Tidwell, and I am still a Marine because once a Marine, always a Marine. But so I'm 28 years old. I'm a completely blind veteran. I lost my sight about 5.5 years ago now to a suicide attempt. And since then, I've kind of just rebuilt myself back from having to learn how to brush my teeth all the way to now I snowboard and rock climb and do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I own a small software development company because
Amazing.
I now create software that works for blind people.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
What was it that made you want to go right into the military right out of school?
Some of it was definitely it tends to be the case in my family line on both sides that all the males have been in the military, and so I think because my dad was in the military and everyone else was, I think that seed was kind of planted when I was a little kid. So I knew that growing up, at some point I was going to go into the military. I didn't know it was going to be Marines, and I definitely didn't know it was going to be infantry. Um, that's something that kind of developed in high school, but that was always something that I wanted to do.
That's really cool. Thank you for your service, by the way. I really appreciate it. Um, But yeah, was there a reason you went with the Marines over like the Army or the Navy? Where did your dad serve at?
My dad is in the chair force, so it's polar opposite. But I wanted to be an infantryman, and then the Marine Corps has a reputation, and I think that definitely called to me as a teenager that if I was going to go in, I'm going to try and go into the branch that has that reputation, and so that's what I did.
That's really cool. What was it like as a teenager going through the training of boot camp and actually being a soldier in the United States military?
It's so funny because there's a series of moments. Do you swear on here or no on this podcast?
You can whatever you want to say. Feel
Yeah,
free.
yeah. There's a
You can.
series.
Yeah, you can say whatever you'd like.
Okay, yeah. There's a series of moments in that timeline where I thought I'd fucked up, and it's natural. I mean, that's the whole point of why
Mhm.
they do it that way. But boot camp was that way definitely when I first showed up, and then once after boot camp, so Marine Corps boot camp is 13 weeks, and then you go to your MOS school to learn your job that you're going to be doing in the Marines. So then I went to the School of Infantry for another 3 months, and there were several times during that school that I thought I'd fucked up. And then when you actually hit the fleet, which is your unit, I like knew that I had fucked up. And then of course you just adapt. But it definitely it there were some gut checks with it for sure, especially once I hit the fleet. But it was really cool. I mean, I was a machine gunner, so I had a wild job as an 18-year-old, and I was in for 4 years. So I got to do some really neat
Mhm.
things, and I'm so glad that I did it. But I was also ready to move on when it was time to move on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. What was your favorite part of being in the military?
I don't know if I've ever been asked that before. I don't know that I've thought about that. I think I'd have to say the camaraderie. I mean, you do a lot of miserable stuff, especially as a grunt, but
I'm
it's
sure.
that camaraderie that you build with the guys that you were in with. And even now, a lot of the stuff that I do with the adaptive sports stuff is usually around other disabled veterans. And even though I've never met these people before, when we show up, there's just an automatic bond. I mean, you just hit it off with people. Everyone has the same dark sense of humor, and that's the case anywhere that I go. When you run into another veteran, I think that, and it's really hard to do it justice when you're explaining it. But I would say, looking back, that has to be definitely the thing that's had the biggest impact on my life, I think, or like continuing forward into civilian life. So it's been really neat.
Cool. So after you got out of the military, you were gonna get into nursing. What was that like?
Yeah, I started college almost immediately after I got out. I had like I think a month or a month and a half until school started because I got out of the Marines in August of 2018. And so college was a pace change. It seemed so easy, and I mean it was. And so I was doing all of my prerequisites for nursing school and got certified to be a CNA, which is a nurse's aide, and is kind of like the low man on the totem pole and in hospitals and stuff. When it comes to nurses, you're kind of doing all the work that they're overqualified to do. So you're the one helping people bathe and changing sheets and helping people get around and stuff like that. And I started working in a local hospital while I was going to school, and I loved that. Even that I mean, realistically, that's the boring side of medical care if you're doing the CNA stuff, and I still loved it. Like I knew that would have been a good fit for me, but I just I was struggling with everything else, and because I wasn't talking about everything that was driving me into a darker place, and I was drinking instead, it caught up with me ultimately. Because I'd only been out of the
Yeah,
Marines for
I
about
can
9
totally
months
understand.
when I shot myself.
Yeah. So, what would you say to like other people that are potentially struggling with suicidal tendencies, or other veterans that might struggle with like PTSD or whatnot? Is there any advice you would give them based on like what you've been through?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that you have to swallow your pride and speak up. I know, especially in the infantry community, like and there's definitely a time and a place for this, for the suck it up and get through it kind of thing. I mean, you have to have that in that line of work. But looking back, I realized that, the way that I coped with things in the Marines outside of the embrace the suck mentality was we'd get back from the field and we'd all get hammered. And so when I got out, I just thought that that's how you dealt with things because it worked for me in the Marine Corps, and it doesn't work that way. And it's not a weakness to speak up. I mean, I still think, there was a time since I've been blind where I self-admitted to the VA, to the psych ward. I went to the ER because I was worried that I was going to hurt myself. And that, I still think that, like, speaking up about the fact that I was in that place because I had learned my lesson from my suicide attempt was still like one of the hardest things that I've had to do, because it kind of goes against the grain of what has been instilled in you. But you really do, the resources are there, the VA is there. Just talk to somebody, and it doesn't even have to be a therapist, just somebody that you can trust. I have noticed that for me personally, when I voice that stuff, and I do see a therapist, I'm also very active, which I think most vets are, and that definitely helps. But when I talk about these things to a therapist, I think because I'm voicing them to someone else and I know someone else is going to be hearing what I'm thinking, I think it makes me change my perspective and view what I'm struggling with differently. And that sounds strange, but I really think that that's the benefit, assuming that you have a good fit with your therapist, that is the big benefit, is it kind of puts you in this spot to where you're unknowingly set up to view things more objectively, even if you're in a horrible spot. You know, during that same period where I had self-admitted, there was a period where I was talking to my therapist not only every day, but multiple times a day. Like, and I mean, I had told her, like, hey, I don't want to be here, and I don't get why. I'm just, when you're depressed like that, it doesn't make sense, and it's not a rational state of mind. And, you know, I didn't recognize that the first time around. I was in that place for a long time before I finally shot myself. But knowing that it is an irrational state of mind and you're not thinking clearly, and just getting that out there to someone else, like, people will help, but you have to speak up, because if you hide it like I did, it rots in you, and it builds into something nastier and nastier. And so I know I said it about 12 different ways, but definitely speak up just to someone. I mean, you have to want to help yourself, and you deserve to help yourself. So just do it.
That's great advice. What was it that gave you the motivation when you came to after shooting yourself to want to rebuild yourself from scratch? Like, you had to learn to eat again, walk again, all those things. What was it that motivated you at that time?
It's hard. So when they brought me off of life support, I was so out of it, not only from the head injury, but all the medications that I was on, that I actually didn't understand that I was blind. I was essentially hallucinating, and there's a syndrome that's common with people who are losing their vision and still have some usable vision, called Charles-Bonnet syndrome, where essentially, because your brain is used to having all of that visual input, when it's no longer receiving it, it will just make stuff up. And I don't know if that's what was happening or if it was just the head injuries or what, but it took a little while for them to get that across. And then I think I was so busy in the hospital that it helped kind of distract me. But my parents were very supportive while I was in the hospital, and we had a conversation early on. They were just kind of talking about, oh, like, you know, you might be able to do this and you might be able to do that. And none of us had ever met a blind person before until I was blind. But in the chow halls, the places where we eat meals when we weren't in the field, in the Marines, the salt and pepper shakers on them said, I don't know when I noticed this, but it said made proudly by the blind and visually impaired. And so when I was talking to my parents, I was like, I'm not fucking making salt and pepper shakers. Like, what are you talking about? And I told them about that. And I think that was some just like stubborn motivation early on, but it was that. And then about a month in, I was transferred to the VA hospital. And, you know, the VA is like the private hospital that I was at. They didn't know what to do with a blind guy. They had no idea how to really help someone with that specific of an impairment, especially early on like that. And so I had a Swiffer mop handle with a tennis ball on the end of it, and they would show me how to like follow walls around. But when they transferred me to the VA, you know, they're used to dealing with that and more serious stuff. And so it was like, it kind of opened up a whole new world in terms of during my intake. So people who work in the field of blind rehabilitation all have master's degrees specifically in different areas of blind rehabilitation. And so they had one of those specialists come in and talk to me during my intake. And she asked me what I like to do. And I was like, well, when I could see, I like to ride dirt bikes and ski and snowboard and downhill mountain bike and all these other things, and ride street bikes. And she was like, well, you know, you can kind of get back into all those things except for the motorcycles. And she told me about adaptive sports and stuff. And so that became like the thing. I was like, okay, I'm going to get back to that. I don't know what else life is going to be like, but I'm not making fucking salt and pepper shakers, and I'm going to get back into snowboarding and all these other things. So
Awesome.
I did. I ended up, I shot myself on March 31st, and in the middle of December of that same year, I was snowboarding again. And
That's incredible.
It was wild. I didn't know any of that stuff existed before. And so that for me was like my first step back into real independence. And that was honestly probably the worst part about losing my sight was losing my independence. I mean, my parents were having to help me in the bathroom when I was at the hospital, or these like, female nurses are having to wipe my ass for me in the hospital.
Yeah.
And like, that's miserable. And so,
Imagine.
yeah, just starting to getting like a taste of that back. And I think kind of showed me like, okay, if I can snowboard, I can figure out how to cook and all this other stuff. And it just kind of shifted things. I also met another blind veteran on that trip who was completely blind and was blinded in a hunting accident like 30 years ago. And he got shot in the face by his friend with a shotgun. And we were talking on that trip, and I wasn't comfortable talking about my suicide attempt or anything, how I'd lost my sight at that point. I would get really sweaty talking about it and would just avoid it. And, I talked to him about it. I was like, I don't get first of all, how you're so open about it, but how you have such a good sense of humor about it when you do talk about it. Like, and then I told him how I get sweaty and all that stuff. And he was like, honestly, man, the more open you are about it, the more receptive people will be to hearing it. Because at that point I was getting really bad responses, but it was because I was presenting it poorly. And so I made a conscious effort to start being more open after that. And over time, it's just, it's changed everything. So that first trip, just by happenstance, was this huge kind of stepping off point for me.
That's awesome. What was it that made you want to actually start helping other people with your story? And is there any cool stories that you're comfortable sharing of, like, somebody that you've helped?
I think that it's hard to give an exact answer. I mean, I think for whatever reason, I am attracted to service. Obviously, I joined the Marines and I wanted to be an ER nurse. And then now I do the stuff that I do. And I think part of it was that. And then the other part was, this was a huge negative thing in my life. And this is a way to make it somewhat positive. And that's even when I got back into college. I was in college. So that snowboarding trip was 8.5 months after I shot myself. And I was in college again a month after that. And I started going for clinical psychology. And it was the same thing. Like, it was like, I'm going to make something about this positive. And it was just a weird combination of things. As I got better at being more open about it, I started volunteering for speaking at mental health organizations and just small stuff, over Zoom, especially over the pandemic, to people who were at inpatient facilities or staff members who worked at those inpatient facilities or schools. And it helped me get more comfortable with it, while I felt like, someone might hear it. And we've had family, friends, and I even had, within the last 9 months or so, maybe the last year, a guy that I went to boot camp with that I haven't talked to since boot camp reached out and just said, hey man, like I had no idea any of this happened. I'm sorry it happened. I'm not in a good spot right now. And we talked it out, and I've checked in on him. I basically kind of gave him the same spiel that I just gave you about going to therapy and all that stuff. And, I recognize where I went wrong now, and he seems to be doing good. I mean, I haven't heard a whole lot from him, but he's still around. It's something. But I think the biggest thing is this, in January, I'm supposed to get to go help set up a new suicide prevention program with a veteran organization. And so they're curious about it. And they're having me and one other survivor come out, and we're going to be out there for several days, kind of giving our input on the things that they have questions on, because there's a lot of misconceptions around suicide. And obviously not many of us are lucky enough to survive or to be. I mean, the fact that I can still talk and all this stuff is wild, on top of the fact that
Yeah.
I survived. So yeah, it feels like it's kind of coming full circle now, which is really neat.
Were you or anybody else surprised at how quickly you recovered from this?
I think we all kind of were. We
Mhm.
we all assumed that. I mean, I assumed early on it was going to be a nursing home or living with my parents for the rest of my life, and I think my parents probably assumed I would be living with them for the rest of my life too. And the VA, after, because I had to have facial reconstruction surgery where they put a titanium plate in my face to rebuild all the bone that was blown out and stuff like that. And after that, after I was stable, the VA sent me to a blind rehab center. They have 13 of them around the country, and it's only for blind and low vision veterans, but they teach you how to be blind. And so I went there for 2.5 months and learned the basics, and then just kind of ran with it. And I, I mean, it, I got into school that January. That summer, I moved back out on my own, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just kind of faked it till I made it. And it's kind of putting yourself in those situations where you are uncomfortable, really,
Mhm.
especially like that. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. I knew I needed to. I Getting my full independence back was my biggest thing, and so when I moved out, I just kind of stumbled like a constant, like if you trip and you kind of catch yourself and you keep kind of running because you're trying to catch yourself, and eventually I caught myself. And it was all just figuring it out as I went. And again, I did have family support. That's a huge thing. I don't know where I would have been without that. My parents were at the hospital every day while I was in the hospital, and I would imagine, had I not had any support coming out of something like that, that could have been a very different ball game.
I can imagine. Um,
Yeah.
tell me about a Dark Horse, your company that you started out of necessity because you weren't able to, I guess, continue in studies because of something or another. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So while I was in college, so blind people can use computers. Like I said, I'm lights out blind. I see nothing but blackness, but my computer and my phone talk to me,
Yeah.
and it's all, I didn't notice at the time,
Mhm.
but that software is kind of like an extra layer on top of everything else. And so when I was in college, these public colleges have to have disability resource centers where they convert inaccessible materials like textbooks for a blind person into formats that we can access. And so everything was fine while I was in English classes and stuff like that, because they could just convert my textbooks into Word documents. But I hit my first math class, and math is notoriously difficult for blind people, anyways. But I was taking this class over a summer semester, and so the staff was pretty, they weren't at full capacity, and I was in a math class where nothing about the class was accessible, none of the software, none of the books, um, testing, like homework wasn't. And so the school assigned someone to be my eyeballs for that class. And so she would read everything to me that she has in front of her. And then I had a talking scientific calculator, like your TI-84 that you used in high school, but it just talks. And we would go through these homeworks that would, take 3 or 4 hours to complete, and then the quizzes and stuff. And when we took the first exam that night, like after we finished the exam, I was like, fuck this, I'm gonna blow off some steam. And I hadn't drank, um, not intentionally, because I didn't realize I was an alcoholic yet, but I definitely was leading up to my suicide attempt. Like, I had already reached the point of alcoholism. Again, I just had no idea that that's what it was. And I also didn't know that once you reach that point, you're always an alcoholic. And so I was like, oh, I want to blow off some steam. And I ordered some alcohol that night. And that kicked off 2.5 years of alcoholism. But that, and a couple nights into that drinking is when I actually self-admitted to the VA, like I was talking about earlier. But when I got out of that, I started researching why can I pay my water bill but not, or why can I get into my bank account but not do my math homework? Why can I send an email but not pay my HOA bill? And it all comes down to the code running in each app or website. And so literally the developers have to, it happens by accident sometimes, but when I get on a website and it works really well with my screen reading software, that was through intentional coding done by whoever programmed that website or that app. But once I figured out that that's what it was, I decided to drop out of college and teach myself how to code so I could be part of the solution. And so that was in October of 21. And then Dark Horse was, you have to have a legal entity to keep yourself from getting sued. And it's just smart practice in general if you're going to be putting things on an app store. So I taught myself how to code, and that first app came out. And it was really a test run to make sure that I could do this. So I made the entire app, all the visuals and everything. And it's a word puzzle game called Xanagrams. And I would imagine it probably looks pretty plain to someone like you because a completely blind dude wrote it. And I've never written a line of code when I could see, but it's really neat because it looks and functions normally for someone who can see, but it's accessible for the entire range of visual disabilities, from color blindness all the way down to total blindness like me. And it even outputs to Braille for people who are blind, and people with spinal cord injuries or like missing upper limbs can use it with their voice. And so it's all this stuff that's going on behind the scenes. That's the big deal. And so I got invited to speak. Yeah, it's been neat. Again, I didn't know any of this stuff existed before. And it's just along the learning path, I realized that these were like that stuff was possible. And so I won 2 awards from some small accessibility based sites at the end of the year last year. And then I'll actually be speaking at it's called GA Conf. It's a game accessibility conference, and it is at the end of October. And last year, a little over 8,000 people attended, and it's AAA game developers. So, your Facebooks and your Googles of the gaming industry come to these conferences, and they're having me speak. Yeah, just because of what I did with that.
That's so cool.
And
that's really cool.
It's wild, dude. That is never something, especially because I don't have a degree, that I thought I would be doing. And so it'll be cool to see if I get to start working with some of these companies to help them make stuff more accessible. I mean, that's kind of been the whole goal with Dark Horse, is everything that I make. And Dark Horse is Dark Horse Game Studio, so it is intentionally meant to be games. But I am working on some stuff behind the scenes right now that is more utilitarian, but it is the same kind of thing. It will help everyone, but it'll look and function normally for people without disabilities, but it'll have all of these same incredible supports behind the scenes for everyone who needs it. And it's just, it turned in. Yeah, it started as an experiment, and then it was something that I kind of got addicted to. I mean, it's neat as a creative outlet to have all that. And now it's turning into real things. And it's just about to be 3 years since I started teaching myself. I mean, that's it's wild. There's so many things that are kind of coming together at once right now that it feels strange. Like it's been, it's kind of surreal right now, but it's really neat.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like, God bless you, man. I hope everything just takes off and you're able to impact tons of disabled people being able to do and normalize like just gaming and just regular things. You know what I mean? Bring the things that you used to enjoy back into like your everyday life and into a lot of other people's lives. That's incredible.
Well, and like I'm trying to think. I bet there was somewhere around, actually, I don't know. There were months in the process while I was early on before I really knew how to do anything where all I could really do all day was listen to podcasts or audiobooks. I would work out and then I would listen to stuff all day because I didn't know how to use a computer yet. I didn't know how to do anything. And but when I found, after I went to blind rehab, they showed me some apps like that were accessible, and I found some games, and even just having something that was other than being stuck in total darkness, listening to stuff while you're obviously depressed after
Yeah.
losing your sight from a suicide attempt, and just little things like that as little distractions, because I mean, that's ultimately what games are. It's an escape. And it's cool to be able to hopefully have other stuff like that. And even, I mean, there was so much research put into trying to figure out how a blind person could code, because all of the tools that I have to write my code in also have to be accessible, and like they run into those same issues. And so it's all, I've been able to document some of that stuff to help some other blind people get started. And especially because unemployment is a huge issue in with big disabilities like blindness. I think a lot of it is definitely because of inaccessibility of stuff. You know, if you're working at a company and they have some sort of customer management system and it's not accessible, well, then you can't work there because you can't do the job. And but software development stuff like this is especially, it's a place where blind people could excel, because if you get really heavily into the accessibility side of stuff like I have, and go decide to work for a large company instead of doing your own thing, I mean, you could make really good money doing this stuff. And so just, yeah, I mean, like every facet of turning into a total nerd has been cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, that's I basically learned the basics on JSON, and I can basically barely do that. So what you've been able to do, not even being able to see the monitor or the keys or any of that stuff, is just incredible. I was just talking about how incredible that is. To be able to do all of that and learn all of that, and not only teach other people that stuff too.
Yeah, I'm not teaching anyone how to code, but just laying out the resources that I found. It's cool. But I mean, have you ever heard screen reading software before, or had you ever even heard of it?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
I want to see here if you can hear how fast this thing talks. I mean, can you hear my computer at all?
Oh wow, yeah, again.
Yeah, so that's like when I code and stuff, that's how fast it's talking. And it's funny though, when you're around blind people, like everyone has it cranked way up like that. You just get used to it
Oh
over
really?
time. But yeah, I don't know. It's crazy what the technology can do. But I mean, I couldn't imagine being blind 40 years ago. That would have been miserable. But yeah.
Well, I'll give you a lot of credit. I mean, just to see, all the things that you've done since. Moving forward, it looks like we have 2 questions left for you today. The first is an audience submitted question that we get every week. It's called No Dumb Questions. The
Okay.
question this week is, did you have a near-death experience during your suicide attempt?
I take it as in, like, did I see the light kind of thing?
Yeah, did anything like I would assume that that's what that means. Did anything like that happen?
No, I was actually, I don't remember any of this, but I was awake all the way into the hospital and combative. And so my heart never stopped beating. I don't, But yeah, nothing crazy like that.
Cool. Last question. It's normally a silly one. It's we have to ask, but you don't have to answer. So with
Okay.
your background competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and to the best of my understanding, you compete against people that do not have disabilities. My question is,
Correct.
are you Daredevil?
No, that's
It's the
actually
first thing I thought when I read that was, this man is Daredevil.
no. So that's actually that's the one thing that changes is so you start standing up in jujitsu and instead typically people start like 2 or 3 feet apart, like just out of arm's reach. And with me, even though my opponent isn't blind, they do start us touching. So I get to grab one of their sleeves and one of their sleeves with one hand and the collar with the other, and they get to do the same on me. And then, if we disconnect and there's a scramble, then they let it go. But like if they tried to deliberately detach from me, walk 10 feet around me, and then come up behind me, like the ref would reconnect us at least. So there's just some contact. So I wish I was that cool to where I could just pick up on that stuff. But my hearing has gotten way, way more sensitive. It's strange.
Yeah, I can imagine. Awesome, man. Well, I totally appreciate you coming on, being a good sport, answering all the questions. Before I let you go, where can people find you? And is there anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, I am actually writing a memoir that really dives into everything that I did, everything leading up to my suicide attempts that I did wrong, and then everything that I've done since. I've learned a ton. I just I have a lot of life experience for a 28-year-old, and so I'm trying to kind of parse out the lessons that I can from the past 5 years, and that's I'm over 60,000 words into it, and so I'm nearing the end, but I'm waiting for something in my life to actually take place here before I put the final touches on it and send it out to an editor. But you can keep up with that on my website, zachtidwell.net. It is being updated right now, but if you reach out to me on the contact form, or if you see it after the website has been updated, you'll be able to sign up from the email list directly. But until then, if you reach out to me, I can put you in there manually. The other thing, this word puzzle game that I was talking about is called Xanagrams, and it's on the App Store. Zanagrams. And other than that, I'm on Twitter at Zach C, as in Charlie Tidwell, and I think that is it.
Cool. Well, again, man, I really appreciate this. This has been a lot of fun for me. I think this is going to be very helpful for people listening too. So thank you very much for being brave enough to share your story. And, I wish you the best of luck in the future with your business and with you continuing to encourage other people to do better in their lives, man. It's incredible. So thank you again. Really appreciate you, Zach.
Yeah, thanks for just being willing to talk to me about some uncomfortable stuff. A lot that was, that's a
My
big thing to
pleasure.
address. So yeah, I appreciate it.
100%. 100%. Well, guys, I appreciate you watching this episode. If you would, go check out Zach's website, follow him on social media. Make sure you subscribe to Picksburgh on YouTube. Follow us on Spotify or any of your favorite podcasting platforms as the Achieve More podcast. And make sure you also check out my co-host, Michael, over at Huddle Card Collection. Till next week, God bless you guys. Take it easy.
From the city. I'm from the city. The city is. I'm from the city. The city is.